So over the weekend, I actually got the opportunity to host a mid-set tournament for all the players who are in Project Mentor. If you don't know what Project Mentor is, it's actually a personal training program that I've created with a bunch of top-level players from all around the globe who help coach players who are Masters Plus to really try to hit their top-end Grandmaster Challenger goals. And in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about the top 5 mistakes I saw the most commonly when watching the players play in the tournament. Now, as you can guess probably from the title of this video, these are players who are the average rank are Masters players. So I would have a good idea that I would hope that a lot of these mistakes are probably prevalent in your games as well. And today we're going to go over not only what these mistakes are, but how you can actually approach them and solve them when it comes to your own games. Now, without further ado, let's go and first talk about the first one, which is stage 1 unit holding was pretty poor, I would argue, throughout watching the tournament. Now, what do I mean by this? Stage 1 is like the most, if not the most important stage throughout the entire game. And what I mean by that is that your stage 1 units, the ones that you end up holding, dictate how your stage 2 plays out. And how that plays out will dictate stage 3, stage 4, etc, etc. So making sure that we're holding on to the correct units during our stage 1 is super important. And this is actually a very difficult skill. A lot of players, including myself actually, struggle with this quite a bit. Generally speaking, when it comes to your stage 1, you want to be thinking 1, the unit quality. Unit quality, by the way, just means how strong this unit is within a vacuum, right? If you put a Morgana versus a Seraphine, who will win against the other with no items attached onto any of them, right? And you should know that Morgana would win that fight. So that is what I mean by unit quality. And you should know like Alistar is going to be the tankiest compared to something like a Poppy, right? And in your head, you should have this sort of tier list in mind when it comes to the unit quality. Now, obviously, is unit quality everything? Absolutely not. Some units are very good and you need to hold them because they give you really strong direction. I think Dr. Mundo is a very good example of this, where he isn't necessarily the strongest frontliner, but he gives so much direction with Street Demon and pairs really well with Alistar that you do want to be holding Mundos whenever you see them during stage 1. Again, this is more applicable to the current patch, which I know there's a new patch tomorrow, but you get the idea, right? I'm just going to talk about this as if we're still talking about this current patch. But you should have this in mind. Now, how do you actually go about fixing your stage 1? Well, first off, I would say 1, VOD review. But number 2, make sure that you are actually like creating a tier list in your head when it comes to the unit quality and like unit discernment and like figuring out like how good is this, like am I actually picking up the right stuff, right? At the end of the day, it can be very difficult to figure out as well because you really want to make sure that you are VOD reviewing with somebody, if ideally, who is a much better player than you are, and they can actually probably help you point, you know, in the right direction, being like, hey, during stage 1, you didn't hold any Morganas at all. Why was that the case? Or you didn't hold any Alistars. This is the best frontliner. Like, why aren't you doing that, right? Stuff like that is going to be really important and impactful when it comes to improving your game, and that is probably something that I would say is the big thing you should look out for if you are playing TFT in general. You'll probably spec a lot of ranks actually if you've never even thought about this that much, but if you actually think about it a little bit, it can actually really help elevate your game. So that is the first thing I wanted to talk about. Next one I want to talk about is going to be poor itemization, and this was the most prevalent I noticed when it came to turns where you had to do a lot of things at once and you just had to like rapid fire slam things and hope that they were correct. Now obviously I think that a lot of these players, had they've been given enough time, they would have just seen the correct decisions, but because they're so time constrained that they didn't always see the correct option. Now I want to give this example in front of you, just a bit of a test if you will. On the left side, assume the dummies that are bench, right? We have a bow, rod, belt, tier, and chain, and you can assume on the right side this is basically all our units that we already have on our board. A 6 boombot board here with BIS Vex items, Warmogs, and D-Claw for the Cho'Gath, and a GS on our Urgot. How would you slam your items in this spot? I'll give you a second to think about it, but let me tell you what the students slam. So if you don't know, you know, if you haven't locked in your answers just yet, I would urge you to pause the video, think about it, and then unpause the video. But I think that's enough time to give you to pause. Let's talk about what the student slam. The student actually ends up slamming, they slammed Red Buff, Crown Guard, Redemption. And they slammed the red buff onto the Urgot, Crown Guard onto Kobuko, and Redemption onto the Cho'Gath, which is, generally speaking, not bad, right? You get 3 items onto your Cho'Gath, you get the red buff, you get the anti-heal, which is great, and Crown Guard is a decent item on Kobuko. Pretty good. But ideally, in this scenario, what you should have done instead is actually slam Shiv, Ginsu, Sunfire. You still get the 3 item on the Cho'Gath, albeit Sunfire isn't that great of a tank item, but it covers your anti-heal. Shiv is amazing in this line because actually, if you don't have Shiv, or any Shred for that matter, it's a lot worse because Boomba as a trait has a lot of magic damage built into it. So you really want to make sure that you have Shiv. And actually, crazy enough, Shiv is actually one of Urgot's best items because he loves having that Shred built in with his damage, and he loves attacking quite a bit. And Ginsu's is, again, a very decent item on Urgot. Not necessarily bad, but not necessarily, you know, incredible, but it's still a very solid item to have on the Urgot here, and that makes a lot of sense. And that way we don't have a 2-item Urgot and a 2-item Kobuko, which is going to be not so good. At the end of the day, you really want to make sure when it comes to your item slams, you are putting 3 items onto your tank, onto your carries, or whoever, because stats are multiplicative, and you really want to make sure that if you are building items that they are on top of one another and not spread out, right? That's going to be the big thing that's going to really separate your gameplay. So if that's not something you're already doing, keep that in mind. And when it comes to your item slams, keep that in mind as well. Now, how do we actually fix this problem, right? Because this is probably a problem that I think a lot of players will have, and I actually have it every once in a while myself. So how do you actually solve this, right? Well, the best way to do it is to VOD review. Go back and actually make sure you are going back and thinking through the process of like, okay, what could I have actually slammed? What were my other options? And could I have made better choices in this scenario, right? So obviously, this is going to be a common trope, but VOD reviewing is going to be the best thing that you can really do. Another thing to note as well is to make sure your bases are covered. So what I mean by that is making sure that you have the Shred if you have AP damage, you have Sunder if you have AD damage, and you have some form of anti-heal. By covering your bases and making sure that you have these, you will be in a much better spot. In this situation, we didn't have Shred or anti-heal, so making sure that we covered both of those bases, we would be in a much better spot. So that's just something to keep in mind. And again, given no time constraints or no stress, it's really easy to just figure out the correct answer. But in case you didn't, or you were thinking like, why didn't a Masters player figure this out? Well, at the end of the day, again, there's time constraints, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stuff you gotta do, so can't really blame them, right? It happens to the best of us. So that is something that I just wanted to throw out there as well. The next one I wanted to talk about is going to be a little bit of being knowledge gapped. Now, this is something that's a bit harder to solve. The only real way that you can really fix this is by talking to players, is by playing the game, is by watching streamers. It's mostly watching. I would say watching streamers is going to be your best thing. Obviously, watching other guides and what other people have to say as well. Twitter is a really great resource as well. That way you can just see what other pro players are saying. A lot of people love posting a lot of great content on there, so you can find a lot of great information, and that can help like bridge those knowledge gaps. But the best thing to do is just talk to other players. But what I mean by knowledge gaps, there's going to be times, for example, I think this was the most prevalent with augment selection, but there are going to be times where you are not making the absolute best choice just because you just didn't know that it was the best choice, right? It wasn't necessarily that you made the wrong decision. I mean, you did, but it wasn't driven by like, what do you call it? Like, I mean, okay, listen, at the end of the day, you just made the wrong choice because you just didn't know about it, right? This is what I'm just trying to say. So for example, let me give you an example, right? Let's say this is your board. Let's say this is your board on 4-2, okay? On 4-2, let's say this is the board. We have an Aphelios 2, we have a Leona 2, which is great. And we are tossed our augments here. And let's say you're given 2 augment choices. Let's say you're given calculated enhancements, and you're also given piercing lotus. Which one do you click on in this scenario, right? In case you don't remember, calculated enhancements, each combat 4 random champions in your last 2 rows gain 40 AD and 50 AP. But piercing lotus will instead, your whole team gains crit chance and their abilities can critically strike. Critical strikes also give 20% shred and stun the target for 3 seconds. Which one is better in this scenario? And I think, you know, take a second to think about it if you need to pause the video. But generally speaking, I think a lot of people kind of jump to calculated enhancement because they think, oh, I got 4 marksmen in the back, 4 carries, all of them get AD and a lot of stats. Why don't I just click on that one? That makes a ton of sense. And you'd be right, it does make a lot of sense. But piercing lotus is actually going to be your better choice in this scenario. And why is that the case? Piercing lotus makes sense because marksman as a trait, in case you don't remember, all of your units actually gain a ton of AD damage. It's actually quite a lot. And piercing lotus gives a lot of crit chance and gives the ability to crit strike. So your units will actually gain like a shit more of value because the AD is being multiplied with the crit damage, right? So then that way you're doing a bunch more rather than just having a bunch of AD and not being able to crit with it. So piercing lotus is going to be better than calculated enhancement. And I think this was like a small knowledge thing that I think would slip a lot of the cracks. Another thing to note as well though is that cool, now you know that piercing lotus is going to be better, but then what if you were offered sword overflow? Now what do you take in this scenario, right? And you know, compared to the let's say you're offered all 3 on 4-2, right? Which one do you actually take? Right? Well, we already went over calculated enhancement and piercing lotus, but sword overflow is like true bis in this composition. You might be going like, true bis, like why is that the case? Well, this comp, in case you did not know this already, this comp is heavily item dependent. You really want to make sure that, especially when you're playing this line, that on 4-2 you have like a fully itemized Xayah, Aphelios, and Leona going into the game. Well, not going into the game, but on 4-2, you get the idea. But the idea being is that if you can't really itemize your Xayah or your Aphelios fully, you are kind of stuck in a pickle, where now the problem is that, well, okay, cool, now that I have like, you know, my 2-star Xayahs, my 2-star Aphelios, and my 2-star Leona, one of those units just fully itemized isn't going to be enough to carry your team. And that's a big problem with this composition. So you want to make sure that when you're playing this line, you have ways to find items. So in this scenario, you'd actually take Sword Overflow. And bonus question, what do you actually slam? You get 5 more swords. Let's assume just no other components. Let's just think about it. What do you slam with 5 swords? A little brain exercise, yeah? What you should do, I'm sure most of you already figured it out at this point, after me just trying to drag all these swords up to the little dummies. But what you should do is obviously you slam the IE, that gets rid of 1 sword, right? The IE goes onto the Xayah here, which is great. A Death Blade makes a lot of sense as well, that's cool. And actually, you should slam a 3rd Death Blade. That way we get rid of all the swords here, and we are left with Death Blade, IE. And actually, one bonus thing as well, you should actually move the IE on, or sorry, excuse me, you should move the Death Blade onto the Aphelios and move the GS of the Aphelios and itemize like so. That is actually the best way you could have itemized in this particular spot. So again, keep it in mind that, you know, there are going to be times where you get a little bit knowledge gap. You might be thinking like, oh, Piercing Lotus is so good in this line, but if you didn't even know that the comp was item dependent, that is something that's going to be really difficult. Now, at the end of the day, how can you really solve this and, you know, fix this in your games? Make sure that if you are playing a line, you kind of understand the conditions when it comes to winning with a composition, right? So in Vanguard Marksman, it's going to be item dependent composition. Make sure we have a bunch of items. For example, like Street Demon, making sure we have a lot of money on our 4-2 roll down, or 4-1 roll down rather, sometimes 3-7, to make sure that we are able to outcap our opponents when necessary. If you're playing Cypher, that is good. Another win condition as well could be something like with Vexotech right now, where your 5 Exotech items need to be playable, and especially one of them needs to be on Varus. So Hyperfangs +1 or Hollowbow +1 is going to be the best bet, and between the two, Hollowbow will be better, right? And things like this, you need to know when it comes to playing your lines, because if you do not know these things when going into your lines, you are going to struggle quite a bit harder, because you'll be playing a line and you'll hit all your units and then you go, well, why am I still losing? Well, that might be the case. So that is something to keep in mind, is going to be these knowledge gaps. The next one I want to talk about as well is going to be item stacking. This is not really too much of a problem, I think, in Masters anymore, but I think I saw it once, and that's enough for me to point it out. Generally speaking, when it comes to your item slams, we want to be making sure that we are stacking our units in as much as we can, and not really being too locked into the idea that we have to slam these items onto our units, right? So for example, let's say we have a Kindred 1 and a Twisted Fate 1, yeah? Twisted Fate is going to be the stronger unit between the two. I think we can all agree on that. That being said though, how would you slam your Ginsus and the IE? Now, I think a lot of players would say, oh, they slam the Ginsus onto the TF and IE onto Kindred. Maybe I misspoke here. Maybe not a lot of players, but definitely some players will do this. The reason being is that they think, oh, TF is, you know, he loves Ginsu, it's one of his best items, and Kindred is an 80 carry, it's my 80 item holder. Therefore, Ginsu's TF, IE on Kindred. That makes a ton of sense, and it kind of does. But you should remember that at the end of the day, stats are multiplicative. So making sure that we actually send the IE onto our Twisted Fate is going to be a much better time for us. TF is going to really be like the big, TF is going to be good with these items because, one, his spell crits, right? You don't want to think too much about IE having like the AD portion of it, but rather the crit portion of it is like much more important about it, right? So TF having an IE is like having like a shitty JG. It's still good enough, and then because the stats are multiplicative, TF will have a lot of value out of it. A little bit of bonus points because TF actually autos so many times that he can actually utilize the AD from IE quite decently. So are you going to end the game with IE TF? Absolutely the fuck not, but you can definitely hold onto your items here, and you can actually get away with some wonky builds throughout the early and mid game just because you're trying to item hold for your particular units later down the line. Another common thing that you can see as well is, for example, if this was supposed to be like a Xayah line, for example, right, and you're trying to play like Vanguard Marksman, you could see something like GS on the TF as well here. Again, not really particularly one of his better items, but it's good enough that you'll be able to tempo with it throughout stage 3 if necessary, if you're somehow stuck on a TF2 for whatever reason, right? So that is just something to keep in mind. At the end of the day, just make sure that we are stacking our items properly, because this is something that happens a lot more often than you may think. So just make sure that you are doing very well with that. The last thing I wanted to note was going to be positioning. Positioning was easily going to be the most common thing that I saw was like a little suspicious a lot of the time. But there's too much to talk about when it comes to positioning, but I did make a video talk about positioning if you want to go check it out. And with that being said, that was everything that I really wanted to cover in today's video. If you have any questions or anything you wanted to point out or talk about, please let me know. I think that'd be really cool to talk about it and discuss what you think are the top mistakes a lot of master tier players are making. But with that being said, I hope this video was helpful. I hope this was great. And if you have any questions, please ask me. Oh, one last thing. Sorry, there was one bonus tip as well. Line selection was really poor. That I think was something important to note, but I'm not the best at line selection, so that's something to keep in mind. Line selection, if you don't know, is your ability to choose the correct composition to play in a lobby, so that's something to keep in mind, but we'll talk about that more in a future video, little foreshadowing there. But anyways, hope this was helpful. Take care, guys. Like and subscribe if you find this helpful, and happy climbing.